I'm going to be talking to Dr. Brendan Haley, who is the Policy Director for Efficiency Canada, about the 2022 Energy Efficiency Scorecard. So, welcome to the interview, Brendan.
Thank you very much.
Now, I have to confess, I've been interviewing you for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, 3 years. It's been quite a while. And we've done a number of interviews on these, your annual scorecards in the past. But I have to admit that the tipping point for me in terms of my understanding about energy efficiency was this spring when we installed a heat pump, replaced a gas furnace with a heat pump. And I began tracking my electricity usage versus, the combination of electricity and gas that we'd used previously. And I'm astonished by how much more efficient the heat pump is than the gas furnace was. And how much, my costs are lower, it's more comfortable, it's obviously, far fewer emissions. And now you've got my attention in a way you didn't before. And so just to frame the discussion, why don't you tell us about the scorecard?
Sure. Well, I mean, the work I do is the real on the ground stuff, is that relationship between, the installers and the program managers who help you get that heat pump and the consumers who have that realization like you, right? What I'm doing is looking at the policy mixes that try to enable that on the ground, magic to happen, right? So what the scorecard does is we look at the policies and programs in each of the provinces and territories, because the provinces really control things like utilities and building codes, transportation systems, that really have a big effect. And we essentially try to look at all the best practices. We have a transparent scoring system after we do our benchmarking, and we add up all those scores and we get results and we get ranks. And it's a little bit fun because we can talk about which province is the best and which province is, taken over another province, et cetera.
Well, okay, let's have a little fun then. Which are the best provinces in terms of your energy efficiency rating?
Well, British Columbia has won the scorecard every single year for 4 years running now. And that is not because they're just standing still, right? I mean, they're actually planning to implement some leading policies. So the building codes in British Columbia could still be improved, but are the best in the nation. They're going to make every single new space heat and hot water system 100% efficient. So that'll make those heat pumps kind of the market norm whenever you go to replace a system. When you go to sell a building or purchase a building, then energy label will be on that building. Those are all policies that BC is moving forward with. This year, Nova Scotia came in second for the first time. That's largely driven by having best practice energy savings. So Nova Scotia, their programs run by Efficiency Nova Scotia, have achieved typically the most significant energy savings in the country, and they place a big emphasis on low income and Indigenous populations.
One of the things that I've learned over many years of reporting on energy technologies is that scale really matters. And so policy, whether it be building codes or whether it be subsidies like BC and BC Hydro had for us in our heat pump, the federal government had subsidies. All of that matters a lot. Now, it might not matter as much 10 years from now, once everybody's scaled up, the costs have come down and so on. But it seems to me that acting early gives a province an early mover advantage. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think that it's a system. So we often talk about policy mixes, and they complement each other. So often, we track things like the number of certified energy managers in each province, and that's supply side expertise. But really, it's the provinces with the best demand side initiatives, like requiring energy reporting from buildings or building benchmarking energy management systems, that have those energy managers. So it's important to think about that larger system. I will say that often what we're tracking here is more traditional utility programs because that's where we can get energy savings data. And in other research we've done, we talked about really needing to break out of some of the constraints of that system, which tends to be quite focused on incremental savings that are very cost effective, but really we need to retrofit almost all the buildings. So how do we do that at scale, and how do we bring down the costs over time? That requires a very different policy perspective than that we actually see in the provinces right now, which tend to be more utility-based programs.
Well, let's talk about the worst provinces. Which ones are those?
Well, the Saskatchewan came in last this year. There's
I'm
very
shocked.
little happening in Saskatchewan. And I think that's going to be a big problem for them because they have one of the most carbon intensive electricity systems in the country. And the federal clean electricity standard is going to require fully decarbonized or nearly fully decarbonized electricity systems in the next decade and a half. And an obvious way to help meet that goal in Saskatchewan would be more electric energy efficiency.
Right. And I suppose I think Alberta came in number 9, didn't it?
Actually, I have to check, sorry, on the rankings, but it was not second last. Second last was Newfoundland and Labrador, and then Alberta was, yes, towards the end. Alberta, had some quite robust energy efficiency programs under Energy Efficiency Alberta, and some of those have continued, and some of those have moved on to other types of organizations, and it's because of that that Alberta continues to score relatively higher, as well as some of the policies that were implemented in Alberta, like being able to finance efficiency improvements through property tax bills, for example.
Yeah, that's a big one. And we have yet here at Energy Media to report on that. But maybe for, our viewers who aren't familiar with it, can you give us a brief overview of that system?
Right. So a big issue that a homeowner might face when looking at doing a really deep retrofit is we could show them a calculation to say um, these upgrades will pay off over time through energy savings and comfort benefits, et cetera, over a number of years, right? Say 20 years. The person might say, well, I might end up selling my house in 10 years and I won't get the benefit. And so what this system of financing energy efficiency through the property tax system allows you to do is pay off those measures through your house. It stays with the house. So when you sell your house, the next person just continues to pay that small charge on property tax bills. So it's a way of financing, a way to spread those costs over time, but it's also a way to link the benefit of energy efficiency with the actual building and not the actual person. It's not a magic solution, but it's one of the key solutions. And for instance, British Columbia has yet to implement that, I think, but has promised to implement it. And we saw the Alberta government, the NDP government in Alberta, implement that, and it's still in effect there.
Right. And as I understand it, there are a number of American states that have brought in that kind of system. Okay, well, let's wrap up our conversation by talking about the role of the federal government here, because your scorecard argues for more federal investment in energy efficiency programs.
Yeah, the top recommendation for the federal government is investing in energy efficiency for low to moderate income Canadians. So the federal government's been very active in energy efficiency in recent years. The one signature item is this Greener Homes initiative that they have, where you can get a grant, you can get a loan, but both of those require you to pay up front and then receive those incentives afterwards, or to take on more debt. Now, that's just not possible. Someone who's working, paycheck to paycheck and has low income. So, in the United States, they have had a low income efficiency program since the 1970s, and it deals with that upfront cost barrier. And that's what we need to do in Canada. And it just seems to me this is so critical now that with inflation and cost of living pressures and with the politics of carbon pricing, I think the federal government needs to move quickly to ensure everyone can benefit from energy efficiency, regardless of your income.
Right. And I think we're talking about 4.5 million Canadians who would be affected.
Yeah, that would be the number of Canadians that are below the poverty line. I would argue that that's an at least number, because there's lots of
Sure.
Canadians that are, just above that poverty line, so to speak, that would also face significant barriers.
One of the things, and maybe we'll wrap up the conversation with this question instead of the last question, but an interesting little observation. Now, I live on Vancouver Island, which has a temperate climate, so the conversation in our neighborhoods are probably a little different than somebody who lives in Saskatchewan or even Ontario, Quebec, where it's a little colder climate. But nevertheless, it's very interesting how in the last couple of years the narrative has changed around energy efficiency and the conversations. Like nobody used to sit around and talk about heat pumps, not at least not in my experience. And yet now, as we talk to our neighbors and in our community, it comes up, and there's a growing awareness. Same with solar, and it seems like that has got to be play into this argument you're making about greater investment in energy efficiency and better policy.
I hope so. I think that's an exciting observation. I think some of that discussion has to do with decades of energy efficiency, experts and practitioners, working away at it. But just on the policy side, we're also seeing some hopeful signs about provinces really recognizing they need energy efficiency. So Ontario's just increased its electric energy efficiency because it's in a real crisis situation with the nuclear refurbishments. Quebec is increasing its electric energy efficiency because it needs those savings to electrify. So it's they're moving down from a fairly low amount, but it's also nice to see policymakers of all different ideological stripes recognizing, they really need people to save energy.
Well, hopefully the conversation will become more widespread. Thank you very much for this, Brendan.
Thank you very much.